This is Shaker Life, and I'm Cynthia Kyle. Our program tonight is going to be excerpts from two forum discussions that were held in November at our junior high schools here in Shaker Heights. The moderators for these panel discussions were humanitarian scholars. The audience came from the community at large, and the topic was integration here in Shaker Heights. Preceding the forum discussions was the tape, Race in Residence, the Shaker Heights Model. This tape, which was funded by the Ohio Humanities Council, deals with the integration process that has occurred here in Shaker Heights. Time prevents us from sharing with you the entire discussions that were held on both those nights, but if you are interested in seeing them, they are available at the Bertram Woods Library.
Actually a resident of Des Moines, Iowa, have been working in Cleveland for a week and looking for a house and trying to understand Shaker Heights. and I want to commend the community and the panel because that film answered a lot of questions, and one of the homes that I've been looking at is in the Lomond area, and I don't know if I can afford it or not, but I think it helped me resolve that I'd like my family to live in Shaker Heights, and I commend you for that. The question I do have about the film did mention property values and monitoring them. Is that continuing to be done, and do the statistics continue to show that strength?
Can you respond to that, Avery?
Yeah, the statistics continue to show that strength. There was a segment in the film, Ken Kovach talked about the initial fears back 20 years ago about the impact of integration. And what we have found in Shaker Heights and the sister communities is that the stability and the quality of city services, those kind of issues have really related to the fact that, particularly in recent years, we have not only seen a maintenance of strength, but an increase in strength in terms of property values, in terms of the value of the community as a whole. It's a very good question.
One thing, the film was talking about Shaker Heights as a model, but I was wondering where the opposition against integration is. I mean, is there an opposition in Shaker?
In Shaker or generally?
Well, on a national level, but also in Shaker because it's considered a model.
Well, I think you can.
Yeah. Yeah, the question is, in effect, what are the forces which are antagonistic to the process of integration? Right now, the issue of integration maintenance is really on the cutting edge of national policy. We have a Secretary of Housing and Urban Development who, surprisingly to some, has come out in support of the idea of increasing choice opportunities for black Americans, increasing choice opportunities for white Americans, promoting the concept of integration maintenance, which is a choice-enhancing process. Like Mr. Battle said in the movie, we are dealing with a process integration. There have been, in fact, the multi-billion-dollar organized real estate industry has come out in opposition to the concept of integration maintenance. The Assistant Attorney General of the United States for Civil Rights is against integration maintenance. So yeah, we have a battle. And in order for communities like Shaker Heights and sister communities and black and white Americans who want to live together, the forces are indeed out there, coupled with the existing racism and prejudice which many of the participants in the film acknowledge. So it is not going to be an easy task, and there is organized opposition to the process. They're claiming that integration maintenance, think about this. The real estate industry, which was basically one of the primary actors in causing housing segregation and dual housing market in America, has now come out against integration maintenance because it is concerned that it's going to deny housing choice to black Americans. Isn't that wonderful? Actually, I think what they're concerned about is it may interfere with their ability to get listings. But the fact is that this is their position, and they have support because Mr. Reynolds, who is America's chief civil rights law enforcement officer, says we shouldn't have to think about integration maintenance. That is, let's not pretend that there's a dual housing market in America. Well, that is a fantasy. You can't have free choice if you don't recognize what's happened historically. If you have a community that's integrated and wants to stay that way, if you let natural forces, you let the real estate industry make the choices for you rather than having free choice, then what's going to happen? You'll have East Cleveland, you'll have other communities that turn all white to all black, and the people who really want to choose, you and I, black and white Americans, don't know the choice because it is manipulated by another.
The folks who are most damaged by resegregation are black people. George Sternley last year spoke at Cleveland State University, and he was talking about the dual housing market and how white people have increasingly looked to buy housing with a view to selling it. They are investing in real estate, and they are acquiring capital, they're acquiring wealth, and they're passing it on to their kids. Black people, by virtue of segregation and what happens with segregation, are left in the shelter market. They're not in the post-shelter market. They're not making investment. They're paying for shelter. The property doesn't appreciate, not because black people can't take care of their kids, not because black people don't keep a nice roof on the house or trim the hedge, but because if there is no demand for what they have, the laws of supply and demand will mean that their property will not appreciate. Black people are not gaining wealth as a result of segregation. Black people in this community, when surveyed, were slightly more supportive, and the whole community was supportive of race-conscious efforts to promote and maintain integration. More supportive than our white people. The client of an integration maintenance program is the community, and the people who benefit from it are the people who own property, particularly in those areas where there's an underrepresentation in terms of demand from whites.
Don, I think you expressed the philosophy extremely well, and I admire it. I believe in it. I've been part of that for some years. At the same time, I think that it is unrealistic to say that the housing office can be race neutral in doing what it does when there are more black families that could afford to buy in the more integrated areas, and that you say we serve black families equally by showing them housing in more white areas, but it's often housing that they can't afford to buy.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that black people are served by having demand created for property which they own. The client is not the housing prospect.
Okay, I guess I would just say that I will only be totally comfortable with it when the total metropolitan area housing market is open. And that's what I hope is going to happen someday. And I used to think it would happen sooner than I think now. But at the same time, there are, as I said, institutions out there that are working on that larger problem. I just don't want us to sit here and feel smug about what we've done, because the problem is not solved until the entire metropolitan area becomes an open housing market.
The two people in the film, Dr. Ritchie and Mrs. Mason, mentioned an area that was, or whoever was talking about it, mentioned the more affluent area where perhaps black families moving in might be more accepted. And then later on they mentioned that the Moreland area had become almost, the school was 88%. I don't know what the residential breakdown there is now, but it's significantly higher. It's almost a different community than the whole of Shaker Heights. It's so much, the percentage. In fact, it sounds almost like it is on its own maybe a resegregated community. Aren't people more affluent and higher educational levels more accepting of integration, housing integration, and lower income families and perhaps with lower educations less accepting of integration? And then if Moreland is an area, I don't know if this is true, where they said more blue-collar families in that area, it sounds like the area's become almost totally black. How do you work to deal with those factors that are race and class or socioeconomic status and try to reverse that?
Well, I think the issue of race and class is a very important one, because about which sociologists write a good deal of very jargony type of literature. Do higher status people, are they less likely to be discriminatory? Many studies in the past have shown that, but actually that is a myth. Because in many ways, higher status people don't have the opportunity to discriminate as often. So one of the questions that we have to distinguish here between prejudice and discrimination, prejudice being an attitude and discrimination being an act. And that's a very important distinction, because many high-status white people don't have the opportunity, because black people simply wouldn't be moving into these very high-status neighborhoods. In the past they haven't anyways. In recent years they have. And sometimes they have encountered discrimination. As a matter of fact, I know of several cases in Chicago in very high-status communities where the houses cost $300,000 that people have encountered enormous difficulties in moving in. So I think that there's one preconception that is in the United States in general, that it's the blue-collar people who are the prejudiced types. Now, of course, the blue-collar people are the most threatened in many ways, because their investment in their real estate is an important investment for them, and it is for them sort of marginal. They work very hard to get it, and so they are very worried, and the fear is prevalent in them. There's no question about it. The fear is not as prevalent in the high-status people because they have nothing to fear.
This is a very affluent part of the world. And I think what needs to be kept in mind is that I think affluence helps to create integration, and the lower the income levels of communities, the tougher it is to do it. And the reason is, I think it has to do with the question of control. Shaker Heights has a history of strong community control. It isn't easy to dump litter on your property and leave it in Shaker Heights. It isn't easy to put a car up on blocks if you want and leave it in the driveway. It isn't easy to let a gutter hang after the ice had pulled it down over the winter. Because there's an attitude that's been in Shaker Heights, I think, from its very beginning, that must be controlled and prevented. Now, I think that comes from a middle class and upper middle class culture. And that's why I think it's easier for the upper class to create integration, or the middle class to create it, than it is for lower class people. But nonetheless, the issue, I think, is control. As long as a community can control, if you want, the physical state of its existence, then people have much less reason to feel fear and to flee. And I think Shaker was successful because, and is being successful because, it has had that, it has it part of its culture. In Cleveland Heights next door, your neighbors, you can see a difference between Shaker and Cleveland Heights. Cleveland Heights is not controlled to the extent by the government and by community attitude to the extent that Shaker Heights is. And you will see housing in less good condition. You'll see more deterioration. You will see, but the milieu of Cleveland Heights kind of supports that. It's loosey-goosey, kind of artsy, you know. In Shaker, it's more of a business mentality of let's keep things straight and neat and in line, you see. But those are very important attitudes when it comes to creating integration.
Let me make a comment about Tom Bier's thing about affluence. You know, Tom, I don't altogether buy that it's easier. There is no integration in hunting in Bay Village and Huntington Park, where they're building $1.25 million houses, and I think there was a difference here. There was segments of this community who had suffered intense discrimination themselves. The Jewish community, for example, were really, many of them were leaders because they knew of their suffering and their denial. The Eastern European and the Polish and Russian Jews who came here in poverty and rags and living down on Orange Avenue, they knew what it was like to be denied opportunities. And I think that they had their strong liberal and kind of community collective approach did help to give support to those other enlightened people in the community. I think there is something there in that it wasn't just the affluence. Because if you have affluence, you can leave. You can move out to Hunting Valley and beyond. Move even back beyond the Atlantic Ocean if you want. If you have money, you can do that. But these people had money in the stead because they fought. They fought against, because there was that part of that feeling responsibility and trying to create a community and not have it divided. Whereas in Cleveland was slightly different, for different reasons, because historic reasons of the ethnic competition for jobs, and that's part of it, Tom. But I don't think you can just say affluence alone was responsible. It helps, but it's not.
Can I comment? Sure.
It certainly isn't the only factor. Actually, I think what's behind the affluence is skill, and I should have said that. It takes a certain kind of smarts and understanding to figure out that the real estate companies are doing you wrong. Now we take that for granted. I lived in Collinwood, West Collinwood, in the late 1950s. I was in college, and everybody was bailing out of West Collinwood. I don't think anybody, I never heard a word. I don't recall anybody saying, hey, wait a minute, we're being blockbusted. It was only, and that was the late 50s. It was only a few years ago that I came across, when I was reading back issues of the Cleveland Press and Plain Dealer of the late 50s, and I was reading the real estate ads, did I see blacks welcome here, and they're naming my street. And they named the street next to mine, and all through that area, back in the Glenville. I mean, that's the way it was done. It was, it's true that on the film, it was just taken, I think it was taken for granted. I don't think anybody at that time, and these were happening to mine was a working class neighborhood of Collinwood. I don't think anybody had really figured out what the institutions, the realtors, the insurance companies, the lenders were doing, and how they were participating in this. And in the Cleveland area, I tell you, it was in Shaker and Cleveland Heights where this was figured out. Now, after you figure it out, you got to deal with it. Ken Kovacs said in the film is they had to sit down and they started to talk with realtors. It takes a certain degree of skill and capability to contend with institutions. And when I say affluence, I think the affluent people have more of that training. They're better able to do it. I've said this a number of times in different situations. By golly, I believe it. The more lawyers a community has living in it, the better it's going to be. Because those lawyers are going to win no matter what they take on. Because they know how to play the game. So I think that's, and my friends, whoever, they're on the Archwood area of Cleveland on the west side, I don't think that guy had a high school education. How is he going to contend with a big real estate company, or how is he going to? I'm not denigrating him. I'm just saying affluence and skill is an enormous advantage when it comes to dealing with institutions.
The film documented the strong relationship between what happens in the schools and what happens in the community. And I'd like for the panel to give us their thoughts, both in a perspective elsewhere and here, on what that relationship is and what their thoughts on, and the way the community is looking on how to make both the schools a part of the integration plan, and so that the whole community maintains integration.
Briefly. Anyone that works in the area clearly understands that the interrelationship of schools and housing is inextricable. You can't ever hope to have truly integrated living without black and white children going to school together and black and white families living together. Obviously, concepts such as magnet schools, the Shaker Schools experiment, are efforts to counter-react to the former manipulation of housing choice. And it is a task which one must be ever diligent in undertaking. There must be a cooperative effort, as there is, with City Hall and the Board of Education, and it can't end. It must continue. What is happening in Shaker, and I use the word microcosmic, it's the best way I can put it, That's done in other communities. It's done in Oak Park, Illinois. It's done in certain suburbs in Baltimore, in Philadelphia. It is the only way this objective of fair housing can ever come to be. It's artificial in the sense that you have to manipulate, but you are manipulating to counterbalance.
I'd like to respond to the note about the schools and the housing market. I teach in this very building, and it's interesting to me that Shaker has integrated schools, but it's very apparent to me that as the students progress from 6th, 7th, 8th, and finally to the 9th grade, that they seem to polarize themselves. And we ask these questions. Why is polarization taking place? There's students that are working actively at race relations, working with this polarization. The one thing that I hear is that, well, we're hanging around with the friends that we live with, which brings me to the conclusion that, once again, that yes, having integrated schools is helping to try to bring people together, but really the bottom line is that the housing patterns are going to have to change in order to really have a true effective change in this. It's just not going to happen, I don't think, truly happen until the housing patterns change. And along with that is what kids see at home, I think, reflect what kids do at school. I was just at a meeting a week ago Sunday, and someone said that the guests you bring into your home serve as role models to your students or to your children in terms of how they act when they're on their own. So if you don't bring any people of diverse backgrounds into your home for entertaining and so forth, don't expect your kids to either. Mm-hmm. Once again, I think it speaks to a housing pattern. So if you live together, you will interact with each other and serve that role model that will bring about true integration and not simply desegregation.
You will observe that I have a button on, and this button says SGORR. I remember this. You remember this group. This is the student group on race relations. A couple of years ago, a young faculty member at the high school, Zachary Green, became concerned, along with a lot of other people, about what happened to students after they left the elementary school. It seemed that through the Shaker Schools plan and other programs that children seemed to get along pretty well at the elementary level. But when they got to the junior high school, that the polarization began to occur. So that these seniors began to really began to question and to try to find some of the answers about what could they do to help students. So last year, they began to meet with the 6th grade students at all the elementary schools. And this has been going on throughout this year also, to help these students express themselves, to talk about their feelings about people of different colors and different religions. And this group, hopefully, this is a beginning of helping students not only to go to school together, but also to learn to live together. So if you hear about this, I hope that you support it in the community. It's SGORR.
My name is Jan Devereaux, and I have sort of had the feeling that a little bit of the passion that we've gone through as a community in the past is missing right now, and that maybe that's one thing that we need to work on a little bit in this community. Also, the timing of this film, I think, is very good. It may have taken you 2 years to put it together, but I think that the timing for Shaker Heights is very fortuitous. The struggle that this community went through over the summer, particularly with the school reorganization, brought out some kind of ugly things, I think. And this is the first time in a long time, I think, that the community has really publicly dealt and focused for an evening on what's happened in Shaker Heights over the last 20 or 25 years. And I think it's very timely, and I hope that this is the first of a number of things that will be done, because I think it's something that we need to discuss more.
Mrs. Mason?
Well, as think Jan said something of what I was going to say. But I think Kathy and Tom probably hit upon it too when they talked a little bit about the pain. That perhaps the film did not show that. And you know, it's kind of like having a baby. You forget about the pain after the birth. But I certainly remember the pain of 30 years ago, Kathy. And you're absolutely right. It was very, very difficult for me as a black person living in Ludlow to say to many of my black friends, listen, look somewhere else. Because 30 years ago, there was no other place to look. And I will remember always an experience that I had. I was part of that volunteer movement that was showing selling houses, bringing buyers and sellers together. And I will never forget one Sunday morning, I got a telephone call from a black person who wanted to move into Ludlow and who wanted to be shown, to show her a house. And when I went through my usual pitch about you know, what our program was about and about the end justifying the means, she said to me, look, sister, I know exactly what you're talking about, but just let me in, and then I'll help you do what you're doing. So there were lots of people who felt that we were wrong in what we were doing. But those of us who worked so hard in those days really believed that unless we did what we did, that we would not have what we have today. But it was extremely painful, and some people have not forgiven us yet. I have friends who still remind me that we kept them out. But in spite of all of that, after all these years, I still believe that what we did was the right thing to do at that time. And I think that I said in the film something that you said, Jan, that maybe we need to get some of the passion that we had years ago. And that even, I speak to that even as far as the Shaker Schools plan is concerned. Because I think that it's going to be that kind of passion that makes white people say again that I would like for my children to go to Moreland School.
My feeling is that in order for integration to continue to work in Shaker Heights, that it is a communal goal, and that not only must city government and the school board and the school administration talk about this very openly, it should always be on the table, but that citizens must on some regular basis dialogue about integration in this community. Where that gets put under the table, then we're in trouble. So this kind of forum is very healthy, and hopefully this can only be the first of many other forums, bigger forums, little forums, but where we get together as citizens of this community and address this issue head on and address what we need to do to make it work in the future as it works today.
If you have any questions or comments concerning tonight's program, or any questions concerning integration, the process that's going on now in Shaker Heights, the Shaker Heights Housing Office welcomes your comments and suggestions. They can be reached at 752-5000. We invite you to view Shaker Life every Wednesday at 2:30, 8:30, and 11:30 p.m. right here on Viacom Channel 27. I'm Cynthia Kyle for Shaker Life.